The world's most famous bridesmaid is now a glowing wife. Pippa Middleton marrying hedge fund manager James Matthews on Saturday at St. Mark's Church in Inglefield, England.
The royal-adjacent fairy tale seems to have hit a shocking twist. Pippa Middleton, the poised younger sister of Princess Kate and once the most talked-about bridesmaid in royal history, has now found herself at the center of a headline-grabbing separation. After nearly a decade of marriage to hedge fund manager James Matthews, complete with a luxury wedding, 3 children, and a countryside estate, their love story has quietly unraveled behind closed doors. But why? What could possibly fracture a union that looked so picture-perfect from the outside? From her high-profile relationships with British elites to the glossy lifestyle curated across magazine spreads and royal family appearances, Pippa's image has always been meticulously managed. But insiders now suggest cracks in the foundation that go far deeper than anyone suspected. In today's video, we're uncovering the real reasons behind the divorce, everything from conflicting ambitions to hidden grief, and why this elegant couple finally called it quits. Pippa Middleton's love life had always simmered beneath the royal spotlight, but when she was spotted slipping into James Matthews's opulent townhouse in Chelsea, just weeks after her breakup with Nico Jackson, the headlines wrote themselves. To the world, it looked like a rebound. To insiders, it felt more like a reckoning. Something had shifted. The seemingly dormant spark from St. Bart's had reignited, and this time, it was burning with purpose. James Matthews wasn't just another wealthy suitor. He was meticulous, calculating, and fiercely protective of his privacy, qualities that intrigued Pippa. Their reconnection felt like more than a coincidence. It felt orchestrated by fate. Within weeks, their meetings became more frequent, discreet dinners behind tinted car windows and late-night strolls through Kensington Gardens, always just out of reach of the paparazzi's flash. But whispers began to swirl. Was this whirlwind reunion a case of love rekindled, or was something else pulling them back together? By early 2016, the pair was inseparable. Friends noted how different James was from Pippa's previous boyfriends. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't interested in the royal hangers-on. He had already built his empire, quietly and efficiently. But there was one detail that gave society watchers pause. His connection to Pippa's late former boyfriend, Spencer Matthews' older brother, Michael, who tragically died while climbing Mount Everest in 1999. James still wore that loss like armor. Some wondered if he saw Pippa not just as a partner, but as a redemption arc in his grief narrative. When the engagement came that July, it was with a ring worth over £200,000, an Art Deco masterpiece, timeless and symbolic. But the speed of it raised eyebrows. Pippa, who had once said she didn't want to be defined by her sister's fame, now found herself rocketing toward a wedding with a man who many believed was trying to build his own dynasty fast. The wedding itself, in May 2017, was a high society spectacle. Royalty, aristocrats, and the international elite gathered in the English countryside. But behind the pageantry, there was tension. Rumors circulated about a prenup negotiation that had turned icy. Sources claimed Pippa had insisted on clauses protecting her own modest fortune, while James wanted ironclad control over joint assets. The romance, once wrapped in silk and sunshine, had started to reveal its sharper edges. Still, they pressed on. They moved into a lavish $17 million townhouse, complete with a gym, spa, and a panic room. Features more common in political thrillers than family homes. Friends joked that they were preparing for the apocalypse. Others weren't so sure they were joking. Pippa's public appearances became fewer. James was frequently seen alone. The fairy tale had dimmed. Behind the walls of their fortress-like home, something was unraveling. The romance that had once lit up luxury beaches and glittering ballrooms now echoed in empty hallways. Something had been reignited in 2015, but was it love? Or was it something far more dangerous? The engagement was a masterstroke, romantic, picturesque, and perfectly timed. In the rolling hills of the Lake District, under a dusky sky and the weight of legacy in the air, James Matthews knelt and held out a ring that glittered like a crown jewel. The Asher-cut diamond, over 200,000 pounds of cold perfection, didn't just symbolize love. It broadcast power, wealth, and intention. Pippa said yes, but in that yes, she was also stepping into a life already tightly choreographed. By the time the news broke, society pages ignited. Pippa's royal rise, they called it. Headlines buzzed with excitement. Yet behind the smiles and the champagne toasts, palace aides raised eyebrows. Some said the proposal had blindsided more than just Pippa. The speed, the intensity, it all moved with the urgency of a campaign, not a courtship. Some speculated James had something to prove. Others whispered that Pippa saw her sister's life and wanted her own chapter in the fairy tale. The wedding was everything the tabloids dreamed of, and more. On May 20th, 2017, Pippa walked down the aisle of St. Mark's Church in Englefield as the world watched. Giles Deacon's gown clung like a secret, elegant and conservative, yet whispering confidence. The guests were royalty, literal and social. Prince William, Kate, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle were all seated under the same marquee. But insiders noticed the tension. Not just between Meghan and Kate, those icy glances were widely photographed, but between the bride and groom themselves. A moment missed in the first dance, a quiet word exchanged that didn't look like bliss. Guests at the reception whispered about it after the third glass of vintage champagne. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The magic of the day couldn't quite mask the flicker of control in James's eyes, or the brief pause in Pippa's smile when she glanced at the cameras. Some called it wedding jitters. Others weren't so sure. The reception at the Middleton family estate was sealed like a fortress. Tented ceilings glowed with fairy lights. Cell phones were banned. Security was airtight. But that didn't stop staff from talking about the odd mood between the couple after the ceremony, or how James had vanished for over 30 minutes right before the speeches, reportedly taking calls related to his capital firm's sudden losses. For a woman born adjacent to royalty, Pippa knew the game. Appearances mattered more than emotions. She laughed at the right moments, kissed James in full view of the cameras, and danced through the night like she had everything she'd ever wanted. But somewhere in that fairy tale, the first fault lines had already appeared, veiled behind the lace, between the vows. It looked like a royal dream. But it may have been the first act of a very calculated performance. By the time baby Rose arrived in June 2022, the Matthews household had evolved into something resembling a country fairy tale, at least on paper. 3 children under 5, a sprawling 72-acre estate in Berkshire, and a family fortune that seemed as secure as the gated fences around their property. But while the headlines read like the script of a domestic dream, the reality was slowly unraveling beneath the surface. Pippa had become the face of idyllic motherhood, Instagrammable, organized, and impossibly fit. She penned articles about prenatal workouts and toddler routines, giving readers a glimpse into her seemingly perfect domestic life. But behind the editorial sheen, her days were long, lonely, and quietly chaotic. While she changed diapers, managed tantrums, and kept the household running like clockwork, James was either holed up in a private office on the estate or away on business in London. when they purchased the Berkshire estate in 2020. It was meant to be their escape, a sanctuary. But for James, it quickly turned into an obsession. The estate wasn't just a home, it became a project, a legacy, a mission. He poured millions into transforming it into the now famous Buckleberry Farm Park. There were ambitious plans, yoga barns, deer-watching towers, even luxury glamping pods. He pitched it as a passion project for families, but to those closest to the couple, it was something else. A convenient distraction from a marriage beginning to fray. Staff noticed the shift first. James's absences became routine. He'd disappear for long hours, sometimes entire weekends, absorbed in meetings and inspections. Pippa, meanwhile, was left juggling everything: children's schedules, charity events, and quiet emotional strain. She no longer smiled as freely when photographers caught her leaving the estate. Friends say she stopped answering calls for days at a time. Her usual charm dulled. And the tension wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. James's high expectations for Buckleberry Farm Park created friction with local residents, and Pippa, always conscious of public perception, found herself smoothing over issues she had no hand in creating. Some insiders even claim she asked James to scale back the scope of the project. Requests that were swiftly ignored. As the farm park expanded, Pippa's world shrank. She appeared less frequently at public events. Her writing paused. Her social outings dwindled. Some close friends feared she was losing herself. What had started as a shared dream, raising a family in the countryside, was now driving a wedge through their lives. The estate that was supposed to unite them had become a quiet battlefield. And in the silence of that idyllic countryside, behind red brick walls and carefully landscaped hedges, the first echoes of disillusionment began to sound louder than the laughter of children or the calls of peacocks. Behind the shimmering facade of wealth, weddings, and royal connections, the veneer of perfection between Pippa Middleton and James Matthews began to crack. And those cracks, once invisible to the public eye, widened into fault lines too deep to ignore. By 2023, the tension was no longer something they could casually dismiss. What once made them magnetic opposites now sparked silent resentment. Pippa's social energy, her love of vibrant conversation and public life, became a source of friction. James, a man more at ease in boardrooms and behind spreadsheets, found her constant presence in the limelight draining. He didn't understand her need for connection. She didn't understand his constant retreat into silence. The death of Thomas Kingston in early 2024 sent shockwaves through Pippa. Though the relationship was far in the past, his sudden passing stirred up grief, nostalgia, and unresolved emotions. But rather than comfort, Pippa was met with cold detachment. James, deeply uncomfortable with emotional volatility, responded with strategy, scheduling, solutions, logistics. He offered no softness, no warmth. The message was clear. Grief was hers to manage alone. And when Kate, Pippa's sister and the future queen, received a devastating cancer diagnosis, Pippa leaned even more into her family for strength. Public appearances became both a duty and a distraction, supporting Kate at charity galas, royal concerts, and press-heavy occasions like Wimbledon. But every time Pippa stepped into that royal-adjacent spotlight, James felt himself pulled further into a world he'd never signed up for. He hated it. The photographers lurking outside their estate, the tabloids parsing his every frown, his every absence. He had married Pippa, not the Middleton dynasty. And while Pippa tried to balance the chaos, juggling her public role with private turmoil, James began pulling away altogether. Sources close to the couple whisper that arguments became routine, Not loud or explosive, but cold, calculated, and ice-edged. Discussions about media appearances turned into accusations. Conversations about parenting evolved into scheduling battles. James wanted structure and separation. Pippa craved empathy and engagement. Their incompatibility, once manageable, had become unlivable. Even their physical surroundings mirrored the emotional divide. At home, they began occupying separate wings of the estate. Pippa often took the children to Bucklebury or her newly purchased townhouse in West London. James stayed rooted in the Berkshire property, surrounded by his business ventures and far from the life they once imagined together. To outsiders, they were still the picture of poise, smiling at events, arriving in the same cars, dressed impeccably, saying all the right things. But those in their orbit could see the truth. This was a couple bound not by love, but by legacy, expectation, and a growing list of silent compromises. And under the glitter of titles, diamonds, and carefully staged photos, the reality was bleak. The fairy tale was fading, and both knew it. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind that lovers share, but the loud, suffocating silence of two people living under the same roof, walking past each other like ghosts. After Thomas Kingston's unexpected death in April 2024, Pippa Middleton found herself spiraling into a storm of grief she hadn't anticipated. They hadn't been together in years, but Thomas had once been her sanctuary, her what-if, her near-miss. Now he was gone, and with him vanished a part of herself she never truly let go of. James Matthews, ever the stoic financier, responded with indifference cloaked in control. He scheduled counselors, booked quiet weekends at their countryside estate, and arranged logistics, as if her grief could be filed away like numbers on a balance sheet. But he didn't ask how she felt, not once. What James didn't understand, or refused to, was that Pippa didn't need a plan. She needed a partner. And when he brushed off her tears one night to take a late business call about a sponsorship event at Bucklebury Farm Park, something inside her cracked. It was the final, irrevocable fracture. By June, their lives had become a cold performance. They made headlines appearing united at Wimbledon, Pippa dutifully smiling beside James, and Princess Charlotte in the royal box. But those smiles were mechanical, carefully orchestrated for the cameras. In reality, they were strangers sharing designer clothes and security teams. The whispers behind the scenes grew louder, about separate bedrooms, about the rare dinners where they spoke only in rehearsed civility, about the hollow ring of clinking glasses in a home devoid of warmth. And then came the paper trail. Unbeknownst to James, Pippa had been quietly speaking to solicitors. Discreet visits to her family's estate in Bucklebury turned into weekend retreats where she met with legal advisors behind heavy drapes and locked doors. She was preparing, not just emotionally, but financially. The fortress they had built together was not just physical. It was layered in contracts, trusts, and intricate investments. If she was going to leave, she would do it on her terms. James remained focused on his empire. Bucklebury Farm Park was his obsession, his proof of success and legacy. He didn't see the storm brewing behind his wife's calm eyes. Or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it, confident she wouldn't dare walk away from the power, prestige, and privilege of the Matthews name. But Pippa had already left him in her mind. She was done waiting for affection that never came, done walking on the shards of a marriage held together by appearances and shared bank accounts. The real break wasn't loud. It wasn't scandalous yet. But the machinery was already in motion. A carefully orchestrated exit plan was unfolding behind the scenes. And in a world where every move is watched, the most dangerous thing Pippa Middleton ever did was stay completely silent. What truly went wrong between Pippa Middleton and James Matthews wasn't a headline-making scandal, but something far more insidious: silence. Over time, the warmth that once held them together cooled into formality. There were no screaming matches or betrayals, just a slow withdrawal from one another. Friends describe it as a subtle vanishing act. Two people sharing the same home, the same children, even the same dinner table, but drifting further apart with each passing day. Pippa craved connection. She thrived in conversation, in shared laughter, and in being emotionally seen. James, ever the reserved financier, responded to problems with structure rather than empathy. What she needed was presence. What she received was polite detachment. Over the years, that distance turned into a wall neither of them tried hard enough to tear down. Now, in the aftermath of their quiet split, Pippa is turning inward, leaning on the familiar comfort of her family, especially Kate, whose health has only deepened the sisters' bond. As whispers of the divorce grow louder, Pippa is preparing for the inevitable media storm, though she remains composed, determined to protect her children at all costs. Meanwhile, James retreats further into his world of investment meetings and countryside development projects. The Matthews family, ever discreet, remains publicly silent. But silence, as it turns out, is what doomed them in the first place. In the end, the divorce of Pippa Middleton and James Matthews is a reminder that not even fairy tales are immune to real-life struggles. Behind every polished smile and royal wave is a human story of heartache, compromise, and courage. As the world awaits an official statement, one thing is certain: Pippa Middleton is entering a new chapter. Whether that includes a return to public life, renewed focus on motherhood, or something entirely unexpected, time will tell. If you want to keep up with royal bombshells and celebrity twists just like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.